Warning: contains somewhat mature content, including language, brief violence, and mild sexual themes, and may not be suitable for people under age 14.
Cho woke up slowly the next morning. She sat up and looked around, expecting to see Tomoko, but she wasn't there. She stood up and got dressed slowly, feeling like there was something important she had to remember, but she couldn't think of it. After Cho had gotten dressed, she went outside and looked around. The house next door to her was small and had a little strawberry garden in the front. There was a little wooden sign beneath the mailbox that said, Tomoko. Cho smiled at how easy it was to find her new friend. She went up to the house and knocked. Tomoko opened the door and smiled. Cho, you're just in time for breakfast! She pulled Cho into her home and sat her at the kitchen table. Cho blinked at what was on the table: rice, red bean paste, and strawberries. What kind of breakfast is this? Asked Cho. Tomoko giggled. A tasty one, now eat up! She replied. Cho looked back at the breakfast and slowly began to eat. While she was eating, something fuzzy touched her legs. Cho jumped and looked under the table. There was a tiny orange kitten staring at her with bright green eyes. It mewed at her. Tomoko smiled. Momo, no begging! Your breakfast is over there, she said, picking up the kitten and setting her by her cat food dish. Cho smiled. What a cute kitten, she said. Yeah, she's my prized possession. I wouldn't be able to live without her, said Tomoko. Cho finished eating and set her plate aside. So, said Tomoko, what shall we do today? Cho blinked at her. I didn't know we were planning something, said Cho. Of course! There's so much to do in Tokyo. Let's go to the mall. Tomoko grabbed Cho's hand and pulled her up, grabbing her purse and dragging her outside the house. Tomoko, I don't have my money, Cho stuttered. Tomoko giggled. Nonsense! Your money is for food and stuff. I'll buy you things at the mall if you like. What are friends for? Cho smiled weakly as Tomoko walked with her, still holding her hand. Cho had never had a friend as nice as Tomoko. They came to a huge mall, also having red X's at the entrances. Tomoko pulled Cho inside and began taking her to all her favorite clothing stores. After hours of shopping, both girls had tons of bags and boxes of stuff, but Cho had much more than Tomoko. Tomoko, you're much too generous, said Cho, embarrassed. Tomoko laughed. There's no such thing as being too generous, she explained. If you ask me, there aren't enough generous people like me in the world. They're all greedy and power-hungry. She laughed. Cho smiled nervously. Tomoko set her bags down on her porch when they got to their street, and then helped Cho bring her bags inside her own house. They took the bags to her room and began unpacking them. We did well! Look at all your new stuff! Tomoko exclaimed. Cho smiled. I want to thank you again. I wish you'd let me pay you back, she said. I swear if you pay me back, I'll feed you to my kitten, said Tomoko, giggling. Cho laughed, the first real laugh she's had for years. Tomoko smiled and hopped onto Cho's bed, picking up the little rag doll. Ah, this is cute. Did you make it? She asked. Cho frowned and gently grabbed the doll from her. No, my mother made it for me, she said sadly. Tomoko frowned, watching her. Why the long face? Asked Tomoko. Cho sighed and sat next to her. Nothing. I just miss her, that's all, Cho replied. Miss her? Said Tomoko. Did she go somewhere? Yes, said Cho. And she's never coming back. A few months went by and Cho couldn't be happier. They hadn't had another demon attack, and she and Tomoko had become very close. Cho had also gotten a job at a nearby bakery, which Tomoko visited every day to buy something. The only thing that upset Cho was that she kept having the same dream every other night. One night, Cho had Tomoko over for a slumber party, so she decided to tell her of this dream. Said Tomoko thoughtfully. Sounds like this dream is trying to tell you something. I figured that much, said Cho, but I don't know what it'd be telling me. They were sitting on Cho's bed. Tomoko was painting her toenails black, and Cho was holding her doll with her knees pulled up to her chest. Well, think about it for a sec, said Tomoko, trying to concentrate on painting her pinky toe. Is there something very important you forgot to do? Or maybe something in your past is haunting you? Cho thought. I don't know, she said. I have been getting the feeling there was something I forgot to do. Well, let's look at the details, said Tomoko, moving to paint her other toes. The door opened and there was a bright red light, right? Cho nodded, silent. And you say this man had yellow eyes, yes? Cho nodded again. Well, it's obviously that you're reliving that demon attack, only not as severe, I guess. But, said Cho slowly, why on earth would I dream about the demon attack? What significance does it have to me? Tomoko shrugged. I'd say it was just a nightmare, but it's been happening for a while. It's gotta mean something. Cho thought hard. She tried to remember exactly what happened during and after the demon attack. She remembered a lot of different color light. Then she remembered the story Tomoko told her when they got home, and it clicked. Oh! Cho exclaimed. The red X on my door! Tomoko tilted her head. What about it? She asked. There was no X of any kind on my door when I moved in, so I just painted one on myself, said Cho softly, looking down at her feet and realizing what she just said. Tomoko gasped, accidentally getting nail polish on her skin. The red X on your door is paint? She shouted, horrified. Cho flinched. I didn't know what else to use. I didn't think it mattered. Tomoko hurriedly closed the nail polish bottle and hopped off the bed. We need to leave now, she said, trembling. Cho blinked. Well, I'm sure there's not going to be an attack tonight, she said nervously. You never know, said Tomoko urgently. Come on, you can spend the night at my house instead. She grabbed Cho's hand and pulled her off her bed. Cho had just enough time to grab her doll before she was practically dragged to the front door. There was a bang outside and a faint scream as the siren began to sound. Tomoko froze and stared at the door, then looked to Cho, whose eyes widened. Maybe they won't notice the X is fake, she whispered. Just then the door flew open, and Tomoko and Cho were thrown backward against the wall. There was a bright yellow light filling the room, and a huge reptile-like creature stepped into the room. Tomoko screamed, and Cho watched the thing, her eyes wide. The creature smiled, baring its huge green fangs and raising a 3-fingered claw towards Cho. It grabbed her neck and lifted her into the air. Cho! Tomoko screamed. She started hitting the demon with her fists, but it just shoved her away to the other wall near the door. Tomoko sobbed as she watched the demon squeeze Cho's neck. Cho coughed, her face turning slightly pink. Just then, a man stepped into the house. He was tall and very handsome, but was strange-looking all the same. His shoulder-length hair was a deep violet, and his eyes were bright yellow, his pupils formed into slits like a cat's. He smiled at the demon holding Cho, and it loosened its grip on her throat.
Master, these humans were trying to trick us. Their X was fake,
it said with a low, hoarse voice. The man smiled. Amusing, he said. His voice was also low, but flowed smoothly, and was much more attractive than the demon's. Suddenly, Cho kicked the demon's chest and sent him to the ground. She flipped and landed in a crouch on the floor. The demon snarled and rushed towards her, and Cho grabbed the katana on her wall, pulled it from its sheath, and stabbed the demon in the stomach. There was a gush of blood, and Cho pulled the sword upward, slicing the demon's upper body in half. It shriveled and slumped to the floor. In a swift movement, the violet-haired man grabbed Tomoko and slammed her against the wall. An electric blue orb formed in his other hand, and he held it to Tomoko's face. Cho held the sword and took a step towards him. Stop, said the man, holding the orb closer to the sobbing Tomoko. Cho froze, face pale. Don't hurt her, she said, close to tears. The man smiled. You took out one of my soldiers, he said, amused. How about I won't hurt your friend if you agree to come with me back to the underworld? Cho blinked, and Tomoko sobbed harder. No, Cho, don't do it! Save yourself! She screamed. The man tightened his grip to shut her up. In addition to not hurting your friend, my army and I will leave here without harming anyone else. Today. Cho looked from the man to Tomoko, who was shaking her head violently. The man smirked. Drop your sword and come with me, or watch your friend die. Cho watched poor Tomoko as she sobbed and shook her head. Cho began sobbing softly, trembling. Tomoko, I'm sorry, she said weakly, but you don't deserve to die. She dropped her sword and Tomoko screamed, forcing herself to speak. Cho, no! Please don't sacrifice yourself! The man laughed and released her, and Tomoko fell to the floor, panting. He came closer to Cho, who glared at him. The man reached to grab Cho, but in a flash, she picked up her sword again and swung it at him. The man threw out his hands and caught the blade between his palms. Cho's eyes widened. She tried moving the sword, but she couldn't budge. The man laughed.
"Too slow,"
he said, and then hit the sword out of her hands. It clattered to the floor, and the man took Cho by the wrists. Tomoko sobbed and crawled over to pick up Cho's doll she dropped. The man watched her. "What is that?" he asked, voice annoyed. Tomoko sat on her knees, trembling and looking to Cho, who was staring at the doll. Tomoko lifted the doll to Cho's hand, and she wrapped her fingers around it with difficulty. The man rolled his eyes and dragged Cho outside, leaving Tomoko sobbing on the floor. Once outside, Cho could see demons everywhere, causing destruction. She could even see dead and wounded bodies lying in the street. The demons all stopped what they were doing and looked to the man holding Cho.
"We're leaving,"
he called to them.
"I found something that he will like much more than a high death toll in Tokyo."
The demons roared and cheered, and Cho trembled slightly, wondering who the man was talking about. Suddenly, a huge red hole opened in the ground. It was glowing and making an eerie whistling noise. The demons all stepped over it and got sucked in. The man followed suit, and him and Cho were sucked in as well. Everything was black, and Cho squinted her eyes, trying to see something. A few minutes later, and the hole opened up again. They came to a world that was bright and very beautiful. The ground, the sky, and every structure was a pure pearly white. Cho had never seen anything like it. The ground was nothing but a floating bridge that stretched and branched off to little floating islands where there were cities and other buildings. Below the floating ground was nothing but space that mirrored the sky, a pure white nothing. The only thing down there was what looked like a whirling dark red black hole. The demons all dispersed in different directions. The man holding Cho opened another portal in front of them, only it was smaller. He stepped into it, and they teleported into a very beautiful red and black room, lit only by many candles. It was huge. There was a king-sized bed in the center, and a fireplace with a flickering blue flame burning inside. There was also a large window outlooking the city on the far side of the room. The man let go of Cho's wrists, which were purple and bruised. She stumbled and fell to the floor, dropping her doll by accident. She stared up at the man, and he smiled at her. His smile was charming, but terrifying as well.
"I assume your name is Cho,"
he said softly, trying to sound friendly.
"My name is Reitan."
He held his hand out to her to shake, but Cho grabbed her doll, stood up, and backed away to the bed, frightened. Reitan frowned.
"Oh, come now, I'm not gonna hurt you."
He walked closer to her, and Cho trembled. "Stay away!" she shouted, and Reitan frowned more.
"I don't want to treat you like a prisoner, Cho. More like a roommate."
Cho frowned. "But I am a prisoner!" she exclaimed. "You forced me to come here!"
"No, that's where you're wrong."
He moved even closer to her, so their bodies were almost touching.
"You agreed to come with me after I threatened to hurt your friend. Besides,"
he gestured to his room,
"would a prisoner be kept in such a warm and welcoming room? You are my roommate, but you also have no option to leave."
"That is a prisoner! You're keeping me here against my will!" said Cho, frowning. Her lip trembled slightly.
"I'm keeping you here for your safety," said Reitan softly.
Cho blinked, frowning. Reitan raised a hand and caressed her cheek gently, and Cho trembled. What are you doing?" she asked shakily. Reitan smiled warmly.
"I am welcoming you to my humble abode,"
he whispered, almost seductively. Cho's body tensed as Reitan moved to kiss her neck, hands placed gently at her hips. Cho shivered, and her eyes widened suddenly, as a horrible image flashed before them, forcing her to remember things that continuously haunted her. Cho screamed and shoved Reitan away. Reitan blinked and stared at her as she suddenly started sobbing.
"What? Am I that bad at being romantic?"
he asked, baffled. Cho crawled onto the bed and hid under the covers. "Don't touch me!" she shrieked, sobbing. Reitan blinked again, confused.
"You didn't like it?"
he asked.
"I thought you would."
"I will not be touched by someone I hate!" Cho yelled, poking her head out from under the covers. Reitan furrowed his brow.
"Hate is an awfully strong word,"
he said, sounding hurt. Cho glared at him and turned away, clutching her rag doll to her chest. Reitan sighed again.
"Whatever. I'm going to go take a shower. Stay in this room."
He walked over to a large bathroom at the end of the room, shutting the door.